The first bullet hit 3 feet from where he was standing. Seo Jinho knew what that sound was before his brain finished processing it. He'd been in enough rooms where things went wrong to know the difference between a car backfiring and a man with a suppressor making a professional decision. The second shot took out the rear window of the lead SUV and scattered glass across the road. His security team was already moving. 2 of them pulling him back, 2 more drawing weapons and fanning toward the blocked intersection. But the attack had been designed for exactly this configuration. Someone had studied them, counted the men, planned for the gaps. The third shot dropped his head of security where he stood. Jinho ran. Not in panic, panic had never been available to him. He ran the way a man runs who has survived things that should have killed him before, with his body on instinct while his mind stayed cold and working. He cut through the crowd on Itiwandero, crossed against traffic, slipped between 2 parked delivery trucks, and emerged onto a side street that smelled like grilled meat and cigarette smoke. His earpiece was dead. His phone showed no signal. His security team was 4 blocks back and engaged. He needed a car. He needed it in the next 30 seconds. That was when he saw the sign in the window of the gray sedan parked at the corner of the intersection. Handwritten on the back of a delivery receipt in blue ink, taped to the inside of the passenger window. Fuel share going north. He opened the door and got in. The woman behind the wheel didn't scream. She didn't reach for a phone. She turned her head and looked at him the way someone looks at a large animal that has just entered their space. Assessing, not afraid. Her name was Naomi Carter, and she had been stretching this tank of gas since Tuesday. She was 31 years old, and the mathematics of her life were exact and unforgiving. Rent was due in 9 days. Jalen's after-school program needed fees by Friday. The job she'd just finished, translating machine diagnostics for a logistics company 40 minutes north of the city, had paid her in cash, folded in an envelope in the center console. She was going north because north was home, and she was sitting at this corner because her father had taught her that splitting fuel with a stranger was the kind of practical intelligence that separated people who saved money from people who wondered where it went. In the back seat, her son Jalen was bent over a notebook, a small reading light clipped to the headrest, working through what appeared to be a division problem with the focus of someone for whom division was currently the most important thing in the world. He was 8 years old and he had not looked up. She studied the man in her passenger seat for 2 full seconds. Mid to late 30s. Dark suit, expensive, even crumpled. A cut above his left ear bleeding slightly into his collar. Breathing controlled. Eyes already moving to the mirrors. North, she said. Yes, he said. She pulled away from the curb. They drove in silence. Naomi took Hongongdero, then cut to a parallel route she preferred because the lights were timed better and the road was wider. Jalen made a small sound of frustration in the back seat and erased something. The city moved past the windows in amber and white. She saw the black SUV at the 4th traffic light. Not immediately. It was 2 cars back when she first noticed it, and she might have thought nothing of it except that she had made 3 turns since leaving the intersection, 2 of them unnecessary, and the SUV had made all 3. She didn't say anything. She changed direction again, turning onto a street she hadn't planned to take, and watched the mirrors. The SUV followed. She changed direction again. Followed again. The man in her passenger seat was looking at her. She could feel it. That car behind us, she said, keeping her voice completely even. It's been following us for 4 streets. He turned and looked. She felt the quality of his silence change. You noticed, he said. I notice everything, she said. My father was a mechanic. He said a car tells you what's wrong before it breaks down if you're paying attention. I paid attention. She checked the mirrors again. That car is 2 vehicles back, and it has been every one of those 4 streets. The driver is good enough not to ride close, but not good enough to vary his position. The man said nothing. She moved. Not recklessly. Jalen was in the back seat, and there was nothing in the world that changed that arithmetic. She drove the way she knew this city. Intimately, specifically, through 4 years of late nights and early mornings getting from one place to another with a child and not enough time. She knew which streets narrowed enough to discourage pursuit, which intersections had a blind right turn that looked impassable until you were through it, which route through the market district created the kind of stop-and-go density that made following a specific vehicle into a commitment. She used all of it. In the back seat, Jalen had put down his pencil. He was gripping his notebook with both hands, and he was watching his mother drive with the focused attention of a child who understood that something was happening and had decided the correct response was to trust the person at the wheel. The SUV accelerated at the third intersection. She saw it in the mirror. A deliberate surge, the distance closing, and she made a decision. She turned hard left onto a narrow one-way that technically didn't permit turns, passed through 3 blocks at a speed that was faster than she liked with her son in the car, and emerged onto a broad avenue going in the opposite direction from where the SUV would expect her to be. She found a parking structure, entered it, went to the 3rd level and stopped. Silence. She watched the entrance from the 3rd floor for 45 seconds. Nothing came in. She let out one measured breath. "He's gone," she said. The man in the passenger seat was looking at her. Not the way men usually looked at her, assessing her worth, measuring her up or down against some private standard. He was looking at her the way you look at something that has just surprised you, which was the look of someone recalibrating. From the back seat, Jalen said very quietly, "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm okay," she said. "You okay?" "Yes," he said. A pause. That was actually really impressive. She almost smiled. The man tried his phone twice. No answer. The 3rd time it connected and he spoke in low, rapid Korean that Naomi didn't follow entirely, but she caught enough team compromised, location unknown, do not return to the house, to understand the shape of what she'd walked into. He ended the call and sat in the amber dark of a parking structure in Seoul with his hands in his lap and his face giving nothing away. She watched him the way her father had taught her to watch an engine at idle, not for what was moving, but for what wasn't moving that should be. He was trying to figure out where to go. She could see it. Not the calculation of it, but the weight. Men like him didn't run out of options easily. So when one ran out, it meant the options that remained were the ones he was willing to use. And right now there weren't any. Jalen spoke first, the way Jalen always spoke first, from the exact center of his own logic, with no understanding of why the timing might be complicated. "Mom," he said. "He can come eat with us." The man in the passenger seat went completely still. Naomi looked in the mirror at her son. Jalen was looking back at her with the expression he wore when he had decided something was obvious and couldn't understand why the adults hadn't caught up. He was 8. He had no fear of strangers in the way children who had been kept small developed fear. He had been raised to read people because she had raised him the way her father had raised her, to understand how things worked, which meant understanding people, which meant not being afraid of them but being accurate about them. Jalen had decided this man was not a threat. She looked at the man. He was looking at her son with something she could not name and did not try to name. She hesitated. Then, "One night," she said, and pulled out of the parking structure back into the city. Please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe if you haven't. It helps this story reach more people. Now stay with me, the real story is just beginning. The apartment was small in the way things are small when someone has put thought into how every square meter functions. Clean. Careful. A shelf of tools above the kitchen counter. Actual tools, a socket wrench set, precision screwdrivers, a tire gauge, which was unusual enough to make him stop and look. Photographs on the wall. A man in coveralls standing in front of a garage, laughing at something outside the frame. A child at different ages. No photographs of another adult. A shelf of books, most of them practical, one of them a Korean English technical dictionary with a broken spine and a dozen folded page markers. He sat at a kitchen table that had a chip in the corner and 2 chairs that didn't quite match. Naomi made rice and something with vegetables that used the bottom of a sauce jar. He could tell had been carefully measured before being added to the pan. She cooked the way she drove. No wasted motion, total attention, economy of everything. Jalen sat across from him. "What do you do?" the boy asked. The man considered this. "I manage things," he said. "What kind of things?" "Companies. Agreements. Problems." Jalen absorbed this. "Are we one of your problems?" "No," the man said. Something in his voice had shifted slightly. "You are the opposite of a problem." Jalen seemed to find this acceptable. I'm Jalen, he said. You didn't say your name. Jinho, the man said. Do you have kids? No. Do you want some? Naomi set a bowl in front of Jalen. Jalen. I'm just asking, he said, completely unrepentant. They ate. The food was simple and very good, and Seo Jinho ate it with the attentiveness of someone who had not tasted food that was made for a specific person, rather than produced for a table setting in a very long time. Jalen told them about a conflict in his class involving a pencil case and a misunderstanding about whose pencil case it was, which had escalated in the way only 8-year-old conflicts could escalate, involving a complete reordering of alliances over the course of one lunch period. Jinho asked 2 questions. Both of them were the right questions. Jalen laughed when Jinho said something dry about the pencil case politics, and the laugh was loud and unguarded and genuine, the laugh of a child who has decided he trusts you. It was the kind of laugh that moved through a room. Jinho went still for a moment after it. She noticed that. She filed it. At 9:30 his phone rang. He stepped outside into the hallway to take the call, and when he came back, he stood at the kitchen table with the particular posture of a man preparing to leave, which she had seen enough times in her life to recognize immediately. Your team, she said. Yes. It's handled. She nodded. She began clearing the plates. Thank you, he said. He said it like a man who said the words rarely enough that they still had weight. She looked up from the sink. I wasn't going to leave you on the street, she said. That's not who I am. He looked at her for a moment, then at Jalen, who had fallen asleep at the table with his cheek on his notebook. I know, he said. She waited for him to say something else. He didn't. He picked up his jacket from the chair, walked to the door, and let himself out. She stood in the kitchen with the water running and listened to his footsteps go down the stairs, and then she stood there a moment longer in the quiet of a night that had been a very different night than she had planned for. Then she dried her hands, picked up her sleeping son, and carried him to bed. He found her 4 days later. This was not difficult. He had resources. What was harder to account for was why he'd been thinking about her since that night. Not in the way he thought about people who intersected with his life strategically. He'd been thinking about the apartment, the tool shelf, the way she drove deliberately, precisely the way someone drives a city they know down to its nerve endings, not from GPS but from years of going back and forth with something important in the back seat. He met her on the street outside Jalen's school at 3:15. She stopped when she saw him, not with surprise but with the focused assessment that he was beginning to understand was simply how she processed information. She looked at the cut above his ear, now closed. She looked at his hands. She looked at his face. You healed up, she said. I did. She waited. I want to offer you a job, he said. Personal driver. Real salary. Benefits. Better than what you have now. She was quiet for 7 seconds. He counted. I understand what your world involves, she said. Yes. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. What are you asking me to do? Drive, he said. That's all. You won't be asked to do anything that isn't driving. You won't be brought inside problems. You'll have a route in and a route out, and if at any point you decide the arrangement is not what I described, you leave no consequences. She looked at him. He let her look. She was doing the thing he'd noticed in the apartment, examining him not for what he presented, but for what was actually there. What the structure of it was. Whether the load-bearing parts were real. Why me, she said. Because I've had 12 drivers in 4 years, he said. And not one of them spotted a tail the way you spotted that car. Not one of them would have made the decisions you made with a child in the vehicle. You're the best driver I've ever seen, and you're doing it for fuel share money on a side street in Itaewon. She was quiet again. I'll try it for 1 month, she said. And I drive Jalen to school in the mornings first. That's non-negotiable. Understood, he said. She picked up her son from the school gate 5 minutes later. Jalen looked at Jinho standing by the car and said immediately, with the total absence of surprise, I knew you'd be back. Jalen, she said. What? I did, he said, and climbed into the back seat. The first 2 weeks were professional. She drove. He worked. She learned his routes the way she learned every route, by understanding not just where they went but why they went there, what the alternatives were, where the decision points sat. She studied his schedule the way her father had taught her to study an unfamiliar engine. Systematically, without assumptions, finding out what the machine actually did rather than what you expected it to do. His security team observed her with a particular professional skepticism that she did not take personally. They were doing their job. She was doing hers. On the 12th day, she picked him up from a building in Gangnam, and as they pulled into traffic she said without preamble, "The gray sedan that's been behind us since we left. It's not your team." In the follow vehicle her earpiece crackled. One of the security team. "We've assessed that vehicle. It's clear." She said nothing. She rerouted. 3 minutes later the sedan accelerated and swung wide onto a parallel street, trying to cut ahead to the intersection. The intersection she was no longer approaching. She had taken them 3 blocks east. The sedan overshot. By the time it corrected, they were already past the window. Silence in the earpiece for 4 seconds. Then Jinho's voice even. "Change the route protocol. From this point she calls it." The security team lead said with restrained dignity, "Understood." She kept her eyes on the road. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. One evening in the 3rd week he asked her to tell him about the shop. They were 20 minutes out from his last meeting of the night. The city at that quiet hour when the streets belong to people going home rather than people going somewhere. She'd mentioned it once offhand. "In the way you mention things you've been carrying for so long they've become part of your ordinary speech." She thought for a moment before answering. "My father was a mechanic," she said. "Best one I ever knew. Not the fastest, not the cheapest, but the one people came back to because he was honest. He'd tell you what your car actually needed, not what he could bill you for." She paused. "I grew up in that shop. Before I could read I was handing him tools. Socket wrench, quarter-inch. Flathead. He'd say the name and I'd put it in his hand before I knew what any of them did." She looked out at the road. "He spent 20 years saving to open his own place. His own, not a franchise, not a brand. His name on the door." She was quiet for a moment. "He got sick before he got there. 2 years. Then he was gone." Jinho said nothing for a long moment. "What kind of shop?" he said. She looked at him. He was watching her with the quality of attention she had noticed about him from the beginning. Not performing interest, not waiting for a pause to redirect. Actually listening the way a person listens when they intend to remember what they hear. "Diagnostic specialist," she said. "Not oil changes, not tire swaps. The complicated problems. The ones other shops send back. There are a lot of machines in this city that need someone who actually understands how they work." He nodded once. He didn't offer to fund it. He didn't suggest connections or capital or favors. He just asked what kind and listened to the answer. She found out later that she'd appreciated that more than any offer would have been. She filed it, the way she filed everything, into the part of herself where she kept things that told her what a person was actually made of. The evenings started slowly. He began asking her to make one stop before his last drop-off, which was technically her apartment on the way to his. It was convenient, he said. The timing worked. She knew it wasn't about timing. She knew because on the first night Jalen heard his voice in the hallway and came running from his room in his pajamas as if he'd been expecting exactly this, and sat down across from Jinho at the kitchen table and said, "Okay, we're doing the game now," and produced a battered card game that apparently required both of them. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her son teach this man a card game with the absolute authority of a child explaining something obvious to someone who should have already known it. Jinho let himself be taught. He paid attention. He made one mistake on purpose and Jalen corrected him with tremendous satisfaction. And then Jinho made no more mistakes and Jalen had to recalibrate his confidence, and the adjustment to his face was genuinely funny. Naomi went back to the kitchen and made tea. She stood at the stove and listened to the sounds from the other room, Jalen explaining a rule with great seriousness, Jinho asking one question, the scrape of chairs, and she recognized the sound of her apartment becoming something it had not been before, which was a place where two people lived rather than a place where she and Jalen held the line against the parts of her life that hadn't gone the way she'd planned. She brought them tea. Jalen accepted his with great dignity. Jinho accepted his and looked at her over the rim as he drank it, and said nothing, and she went to sit on the couch with a book she didn't read a page of. Some nights he stayed an hour. Some nights 2. He never pushed the time, and he never lingered awkwardly at the door. He left the way he left everywhere, cleanly without ceremony. But at the door sometimes he paused. Just for a beat. The way a person pauses when they're leaving somewhere they didn't expect to want to come back to. He always came back. It was Jalen who asked the question. They were on a Thursday night, a game on the table, tea cooling in mugs, Jalen having just won 2 rounds with a confidence that had become frankly difficult to manage, when he looked at Jinho across the table with the direct intensity that was his particular gift and said, "Why don't you just live with us?" Jinho looked at him. Naomi from the couch. "Jalen. What?" "He's always here anyway," the boy said, in the tone of someone identifying a logical inconsistency in the adults around him. "It doesn't make sense to keep going back and forth." "It makes a great deal of sense," Jinho said. "Why?" Jinho looked at the boy for a moment. "Because living with someone is different from visiting," he said. "You visit someone when you like them. You live with them when you're certain." Jalen turned this over. "Are you not certain?" The room was very quiet. Jinho didn't look at her. He looked at his cards. "I'm working on it," he said. Jalen nodded slowly, with the expression of a judge receiving preliminary evidence. "Okay," he said. "But don't take too long. I'm not patient." She laughed. She couldn't help it. Then Jinho said quietly, not directing it at anyone, "Actually, you could stay at my place. It would make the schedule easier." She looked up. He was still looking at his cards, but she could see the line of his jaw, the quality of stillness he got when he was waiting for something that mattered. "No," she said. He nodded. Just once. She waited for him to push it. He didn't push it. And she understood something in that moment about the architecture of who he was. He would say a thing once honestly, and then let it be what it was going to be. He was not a man who pressed. Jalen, however, was a man who pressed. He began his campaign that same night. Every subsequent visit included an editorial comment about the illogical inefficiency of the current arrangement. He sourced arguments from multiple directions: the commute, the schedule, the empty rooms. He had heard about the rooms. The fact that Jinho was, in Jalen's exact words, clearly not an axe murderer. "Took 2 weeks. Temporary," she said. "My terms. My room. I drive myself to appointments. And Jalen has a bedtime that doesn't change for anyone." "Understood," Jinho said. Jalen from the background with quiet triumph. "Yes." She had been inside houses that were larger. She had not been inside a house that felt like this one, controlled in the way spaces feel when a powerful person has lived in them alone for a long time. Every room was functional and cold in the way of a hotel lobby, which was to say it had the right objects but none of the weight of actual inhabitation. Jalen adapted in an afternoon. He found the kitchen at 9:15 on the first morning, located the chef, determined he was excellent and willing to be influenced, and negotiated the breakfast situation with the self-possession of a senator's aide. By 11 he had explored the garden and identified what he called a really good running track. By 2 he had questions for the groundskeeper. Naomi was more careful. She maintained the boundary between her function in this house and what the evenings were developing into. She drove. She assessed routes. She ate dinner with them because Jalen required it, and she had not worked out how to refuse without making the refusal a statement. She kept her room simple. She folded her clothes. She kept her tools on a specific shelf. But the evenings had their own logic, independent of her intentions. Dinner stretched into conversation. Conversation ran past the hour she'd earmarked for its end. Jinho started coming home at 7 rather than 10, and he didn't acknowledge this change and she didn't ask about it, but she noticed the shift the way she noticed all shifts and filed it. He had a way of listening that was unusual in people with that kind of power. Most powerful men listen for the moment to redirect. Jinho listened to understand. When she said something, she could watch him actually receive it, not perform reception, actually do it, and then think about it before he spoke. It was disarming in a way she hadn't prepared for and didn't entirely welcome. She was prepared for a man who was difficult. She was less prepared for a man who was honest. She met the fiancé on a Thursday. Her name was Yuna Han, and she arrived the way she had clearly always arrived, as if the space had been waiting for her. She was 35, precisely put together, warm in every visible way. She welcomed Naomi with both hands and a smile that reached her eyes. She asked about Jalen with what sounded like genuine interest. She crouched to his level and talked to him the way adults talk to children they had prepared to talk to, not the way adults talk to children they'd simply encountered. She was, in every observable metric, gracious. Naomi smiled and answered her questions. Jalen assessed her with the diplomatic neutrality of someone withholding a verdict. Later, one of the household staff, Mrs. O, who had worked in the house for 9 years, passed Naomi in the hallway and said quietly, to no one in particular, "She always wants to know everything about everyone. Every new person. Always." She kept walking. Naomi filed it. A pattern established itself in the late evenings. After Jalen was asleep, there was a window of quiet in the house. The staff had gone to their quarters. Jinho's last calls of the night were done. Sometimes she found him in the kitchen. Sometimes he found her in the library, which she had discovered on the 4th day, and which had the particular quality of a room that had everything in it and had rarely been sat in. They talked. Not about work. About the shape of things, the past, the kind of choices people made and why, the difference between a life that was running correctly and a life that was actually working. He told her about his father's company, the way he had inherited it at 32 when his father got sick, the weight of becoming responsible for something you hadn't chosen but couldn't walk away from. She told him about growing up in her father's shop, being the oldest child of someone who worked with his hands, learning that the most intelligent people she'd ever met were not in offices, but were the people who understood exactly how things worked. He told her about the years since he'd taken over, the years of controlled decision-making, of getting very good at a particular kind of life while forgetting how to want the other kind. She didn't perform sympathy. She just listened, the way she'd learned from her father, with full attention and without rushing to say something back. On the 3rd week of these evenings, she came downstairs late because she couldn't sleep and found the kitchen light on and him at the counter with a cup of something, not reading, not on his phone, just present. He looked up when she came in. "Can't sleep," she said. "Rarely," he said. She got herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. They stood there in the kitchen quiet for a while, not filling the silence with noise, just being two people who had ended up in the same place in the middle of the night. "What are you thinking about?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The apartment," he said. She looked at him. "Yours," he said. "That first night. The tools above the counter. The photograph of your father." He looked at his cup. "I've been in houses worth 40 times what this one is worth. I've sat in rooms that were designed by people whose names you read in architecture books." A pause. "I felt more settled in that kitchen than I have felt in a room in years." She looked at him for a long moment. "Because it was real," she said. "Yes," he said. "Because it was real." They were still for a moment. Then she heard a sound from above and looked up automatically. Jalen, turning over in his sleep the way he did sometimes. And when she looked back, Jinho was watching her with an expression that was unguarded in a way his face rarely permitted. She recognized it. She chose not to name it. Not yet. She didn't notice Yuna watching until the 3rd time it happened. The 3rd time was a hallway. Past midnight. She was coming back from the kitchen and Jinho was at the top of the stairs and they were talking the way they talk now. Close in the particular way of people who have been honest with each other and whose bodies understand what that means before their words have caught up. She looked up and Yuna was at the end of the 2nd floor hallway, standing very still. Glass of water in her hand. Their eyes met. Yuna smiled. The smile was complete, effortless and reached every part of her face. "Sorry," she said lightly. "Didn't mean to interrupt. Good night." And she walked back to her room. Jinho said good night. Naomi said good night. She went to her room and lay in the dark and thought about the quality of that smile, the absolute completeness of it, and the fact that it had appeared in under a second. She filed it. Yuna found her alone 2 days later. The household was quiet. Jinho was at a meeting. Jalen was at school. She was in the garage doing what she did on quiet mornings, which was checking the vehicle's oil, tires, sensors, with the same patience she applied to everything mechanical. She heard heels on the garage floor and looked up. Yuna stood at the entrance in a cream-colored suit, holding a coffee cup, watching her with something that was almost warm. "Can I talk to you?" she said. Naomi wiped her hands on a cloth. "Of course." What followed was a very precise conversation. Yuna talked about how she understood how complicated Jinho's life was, how the people close to him could sometimes misread professional proximity for something more personal. She said it with the gentleness of someone doing a difficult kindness, the tone of a woman who was being careful with someone she didn't want to hurt. She said that attachments in this world, especially when there was a child involved, had a way of creating expectations that couldn't be fulfilled, and she wouldn't want to see Jalen hurt by something that couldn't go where it seemed to be going. Then she mentioned Jalen's school, his schedule, the name of his teacher, the time he was dropped off. She said it softly, in the flow of the conversation, as a kind of illustration of how much she paid attention to the people in Jinho's house. Naomi looked at her. She understood what had just been said. Every word of it. The warmth of the delivery didn't obscure the structure of the message, not to someone who had been reading machines her whole life and understood that the surface of something and its actual function were two entirely separate things. She said, "I appreciate you telling me." Yuna smiled. "Of course," she said. "That's what family is for." She left the garage. Naomi stood alone in the quiet for a long moment, the cloth in her hands, and then she went back to work. Her hands were completely steady. She was going to need to be careful, and she was going to need to be fast, and she was going to need to be certain before she said a single word. The sabotage was quiet. A message from her to a route coordinator that she had not sent. A misunderstanding with a security staff member about a change she had allegedly requested. A question asked with apparent concern by Yuna to one of the household staff about whether Naomi had seemed unsettled lately, planted lightly, in the way doubts are planted when someone has done this before and knows exactly how much pressure to apply. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could be pointed to directly. She saw it happening. She had no proof yet. She continued doing her job precisely and started pulling the thread. Her father had taught her to diagnose a problem in a machine you couldn't see directly. You looked at the behavior, identified the pattern, traced it back to its source. You didn't guess. You followed the evidence until it told you where the fault was. She followed the evidence. The thread about Jalen arrived on a Wednesday. Not directly, that was not how this was being done. It came through an indirect channel, a message to a number she hadn't given out, from a sender that didn't exist as a registered contact. Leave the house. Take the child. Do not explain. The opportunity to do this quietly closes in 48 hours. She sat in her car in a parking structure at 7 in the morning and read the message twice. Then she called Mrs. O. Mrs. O had been in the house for 9 years. She had watched 3 women enter Jinho's life, and understood each one in the way that people understand things when they observe without being noticed. She had her own reasons for what she did next, which were her own and which she kept to herself. But she made 3 phone calls, and she let Naomi into an office she was not supposed to be in, and she said quietly once, "Be careful. And be thorough." She's been careful herself for a very long time. What Naomi found over 72 hours of methodical work was the architecture of something that had been built patiently and in layers. Financial documents that didn't match the story they were supposed to tell. Specifically, legal arrangements made over 3 years that constructed, quietly and precisely, a framework in which Yuna Han would inherit significant operational control of Seo Jinho's organization in the event of his death. The arrangements were complex enough that they required a lawyer, careful enough that the lawyer hadn't known what they were part of, and old enough that they predated her arrival in the house by months. Phone records. A number that connected to a name that connected to the man who had coordinated the Itaewon ambush. The night in Itaewon. The convoy attack. The professional execution of it. The study of his formation, the counting of his men, the planning for the gaps. Someone had provided that information. Naomi sat alone at a table at 4 in the morning with everything she had found laid out in front of her, And she thought about a woman standing in a hallway with a glass of water, smiling with every part of her face, and she understood that the most dangerous person in a room was never the person you were watching. It was the person watching you. She needed one more thing. She needed Yuna to say it herself. She made herself visible. She was at the house, she was present, she was professional, and she moved in a way that communicated, to anyone watching carefully enough, that she was preparing to leave. That the message had worked. That she was a woman calculating her exit. Yuna came to her on Friday morning. This time there was no coffee cup. No cream-colored suit. She was in something darker, and the warmth was less effortful than the first conversation, which meant she had stopped maintaining it as carefully. I wanted to see how you were doing, she said. I've been thinking, Naomi said. Her voice was level. About what you said. About attachments. And, Yuna said. You were right, Naomi said. About most of it. Yuna tilted her head slightly. But there's something I don't understand, Naomi said. The night in Itaewon. Someone coordinated that. Someone who knew his route that night, knew his formation, knew how many men he had. That's not outside information. That's inside information. She kept her voice curious, almost conversational. Do you know anything about that? A very brief silence. Of course not, Yuna said. Why would I know anything about that? Because the only people with that level of access were the 4 members of his inner circle, Naomi said. And of the 4, 3 of them were in the convoy. The 4th was at home. Yuna's face remained composed. It was an excellent face for composure. But she said, I think you should be very careful about what you're suggesting. You're a driver. You've been in this house for. I know, Naomi said. That's why you thought this would work. There was a small sound from behind them. They both turned. Security. 2 members of Jinho's team standing in the doorway. One of them said, We've been recording since Wednesday, Ms. Han. The other said, Mr. Seo would like to speak with you now. She brought him everything in a folder. He read it at his desk in the study. She had never been inside before, and she stood and watched him read it and watched the quality of his stillness change the way she had learned to read it. Not going cold, not becoming the controlled executive she had seen at the beginning. Something else. Something slower and more fundamental. He finished reading. He put the folder down. He was quiet for a long time. How long have you known? He said. 3 days, she said. I needed to be certain before I brought it to you. He nodded. She waited. He said. The night in Itaewon. Yes, she said. He was quiet again. She understood what he was sitting in. Not the professional betrayal. He had survived betrayals, had built a life that required accounting for them. It was the other kind. The kind where you had arranged your understanding of your own life around a particular piece of furniture, and then discovered the furniture had been placed there by someone else for reasons that had nothing to do with you. She didn't rush him. He looked up. You were there that night, he said. I was going north, she said. Fuel share. Something moved across his face that she didn't try to interpret. Jalen said to bring me in for dinner, Jinho said. He did, she said. And you said one night. I did. He looked at her for a moment. Then, how much did that cost you? Bringing him in, the risk of that night doing this? He gestured at the folder. You didn't have to do any of it. She thought about this honestly. My father used to say, she said, that the only thing you're ever really deciding is what kind of person you are. Not what you do. Who you are. Everything else follows from that. She looked at him. I know who I am. That night was an easy decision. He was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. The removal was handled cleanly, in the way Jinho handled things that needed to be clean, through lawyers, through evidence, through the quiet machinery of consequence. The legal arrangements Yuna had constructed were unwound. The connection to the Itaewon attack was documented and provided to the appropriate people. The whole architecture she had built over 3 years came apart in 72 hours. The house was quiet afterward in a way it hadn't been before, which was the quiet of a space that had been cleared of something that had been filling it without anyone knowing it was there. He was alone in the house for 2 days. He walked through it in the evenings after Jalen was asleep, the way he'd walked through things his whole life, with full attention and no rush to arrive anywhere specific. He stopped outside Jalen's door one night. It was open 3 inches. The boy was asleep with a book on his chest, one arm flung out. His face completely relaxed in the way that children's faces relax when they are entirely safe. Jinho stood there for a while. He thought about the apartment, the chip in the corner of the table, the tool shelf, the photograph of a man laughing in front of a garage, the sound of Jalen explaining a card game with the authority of someone teaching a class. He thought about the night she'd said one night and meant it and still made room. He thought about a woman who had driven him through a city he'd thought he owned while a car full of people who wanted him dead tried to catch them, and had done it calmly, deliberately, completely, with her child in the back seat holding his homework. He thought about what had almost been taken from him. Not his life. This. He stood outside Jalen's door for a long time. She found him in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning. He was at the counter with coffee. Jalen was still upstairs. She could hear the specific sounds of a person who had been awake for 20 minutes but had not yet committed to the day. The light in the kitchen was the soft gray of early morning, the city below the windows already starting but not yet insisting. She poured herself coffee. She turned and looked at him. "I've been thinking about leaving," she said. She said it directly the way she said everything. Now that the threat is resolved, the professional arrangement has changed. I want to be clear about what I'm doing and why. He looked at her. "The shop," he said. She waited. "I've been making some arrangements," he said. He picked up his coffee. He wasn't performing casualness, he was being careful about this in the specific way he was careful about things that mattered. Not funding it. That's not what I was doing. But clearing the path. There's a property. Right location, right size, right access for commercial traffic. The paperwork is clean. The lease is at a number that makes sense. It's ready when you want it. She stared at him. He said, "I didn't do it to change your decision. I did it because you told me what you wanted once when you weren't thinking I was paying close attention." "I was paying close attention." She was quiet for a long moment. "You heard that," she said. "I hear everything you say," he said. "I have from the beginning." She set her coffee mug down. She looked at him. She thought about the night in Itaewon, the handwritten sign in the window, the arithmetic of a life stretched carefully between one thing and the next, and the particular randomness of turning a corner at the exact wrong moment and finding it was the exact right one. "Jinho," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you didn't ask. I know you don't need it from me, and you would have gotten there without me. I know all of that." He put his coffee down and looked at her with the quality of attention that had undone her from the beginning, the full, honest, unguarded kind. "I don't want you to stay here because it's safe. I don't want you to stay because Jalen has decided to be immovable on the subject, which he has." He paused. "I want you to stay because you want to." She looked at him for a long moment. He said, "Marry me." From the top of the stairs, Jalen's voice with tremendous composure. Finally. She didn't look up. She kept her eyes on Jinho. "Jalen already told me you were going to ask," she said. 2 weeks ago. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to mind his own business." Jinho waited. She looked at the man who had listened to her talk about her father's shop and held it quietly for months, who had sat across from her son at a table with a chip in the corner, and let himself be taught a card game, who had asked what kind and meant it. "Yes," she said. From upstairs, Jalen descended the stairs at a speed that suggested he had been sitting at the top of them for some time, dressed already, which he was never dressed already. He walked into the kitchen and stood between them with his arms at his sides and his face arranged in an expression of profound, restrained satisfaction. "I knew," he said. "I told both of you. Nobody listens to me." He looked between them. "Can we have the good cereal today? As a celebration." She laughed. Jinho laughed. The kitchen was full of the sound of it, and the morning light was coming through the windows now, properly, gold and clear. She reached out and touched the side of Jalen's face. "Yeah, baby," she said. "We can have the good cereal." They married on a Saturday in October. Not large. Not performed. A garden, 30 people, afternoon light that turned everything amber and easy. Jalen wore a suit that matched Jinho's and walked between them with the gravity of someone who understood the weight of the occasion and had decided to carry it. Halfway through the garden aisle, he looked up at her and gave a single firm thumbs up. She laughed so hard she had to stop walking. During the vows, Jinho said things he had spent time writing carefully, in the way he did things that mattered. She said things she had written and then thrown away twice before writing what she actually meant, which was simpler and shorter and more honest than anything she'd been trying to say. When the officiant asked if anyone had words, Jalen raised his hand. He looked at her. His face, for once, was completely open, all the composure gone, just the boy underneath it, her boy, the one who had been in the back seat doing homework and gripping his notebook and trusting her. "I called it," he said. His voice was steady for 2 words and then it wasn't. "From the parking structure," he said. "I called it." She stepped forward and knelt down and put her arms around him in the middle of the ceremony with the guests watching. And Jalen Carter, 8 years old, put his face against her shoulder and cried in the absolute private way he always cried, and denied it immediately when she pulled back to look at his face. "The flowers," he said firmly. "I'm allergic." "I know," she said. "I'm not crying." "I know," she said. "Okay," he said. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Jinho, who was standing very still with something in his eyes that he wasn't trying to conceal. "Okay," Jalen said again. "You can continue now." 1 week later. Morning. The kitchen. Jalen was at the island explaining something about deep-sea pressure systems with the full commitment of someone who had discovered a topic the night before and had been awake since 6 in the morning waiting for an audience. He had a diagram. He had drawn the diagram himself. It had arrows. Jinho was listening with complete attention, elbows on the counter, coffee going cold beside him. She stood across the kitchen, her back to them, ostensibly doing something at the counter. But she wasn't doing anything. She was just standing there, listening to her son explain ocean pressure to the man who was going to help her finish what her father had started, and thinking about a night she had taped a handwritten sign to her car window because 40 minutes of gas money was 40 minutes of gas money. She thought about how the shape of a life could turn on something that small. A sign in a window. A child who said he can come eat with us. A man who listened to a woman mention her father's dream once, offhand, when she thought he wasn't paying attention, and held it quietly for months until the moment was right to put it in her hands. Jalen finished his explanation with a summary statement delivered with the confidence of someone who had done their research. "That's actually remarkable," Jinho said. Jalen nodded. He had known it was remarkable. He had simply needed the confirmation. She turned around and looked at the 2 of them across the kitchen. Her son, who had decided from the back seat of a car in a parking structure in Itaewon that this man was safe, and had never been wrong about it, and the man who had been running a world so large and so loud that he had not noticed he was lonely until a small apartment on a Thursday night had gone quiet and shown him the shape of what was missing. The morning light was in the kitchen. The city was out there, going about its business, enormous and indifferent. And in here, in this kitchen, in this house, in this specific life she had built from the ground up with her own hands and her father's voice in her ear telling her to be accurate, to pay attention, to trust what was actually there rather than what was supposed to be there. Everything was quiet. The right kind of quiet. Finally, if this story moves something in you, if you made it all the way here, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear a story about what happens when you pay attention to the right things. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell me in the comments, which moment hit you hardest? We'll see you in the next one.